The hammer struck the final nail with a sharp crack that cut through the morning air. I straightened, knuckles aching, and wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist. 26 years old, and every line on my palms told the same story: wood, water, and the quiet promise I had made to myself years ago. One day, I would build a house on this shore, its wide porch facing the lake, nothing between me and the horizon but glass and sky. Silvermere Lake lay calm that June morning, its surface a sheet of polished steel under the rising sun. I had just finished securing the new section of dock when the sound of hooves and carriage wheels rolled down the hill like distant thunder. The Vera clan had arrived. I knew the name. Everyone in town did. They were orcs of old merchant blood, owners of trading fleets that spanned half the known realm. Their wealth arrived first: polished black carriages, servants in crisp gray livery trunks, bound in brass, and an air of effortless power that made the rest of us feel suddenly small. The long procession wound toward the white stone villa on the eastern shore, the one that had stood empty for 3 seasons. I should have kept working. Instead, my gaze followed the last carriage as it stopped at the private landing. A tall figure stepped down. She wore a gown the color of deep forest moss, the fabric catching the light like living water. Even from this distance, I could see she was orc through and through: gray-green skin, warmed by the sun, shoulders straight, height that made most human men look up. Her dark hair was pinned high, a few strands already escaping to brush her jaw. She moved with the kind of grace that came from never having to hurry. Then she looked toward the lake. Something in her expression shifted. The polished poise cracked for half a second. Her golden eyes lingered on the water as though it held a secret she had been chasing her whole life. The moment passed. She turned back to the servants unloading trunks, and the mask slid into place again. I told myself it was none of my business, and went back to hammering. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up gusts, shoving small waves against the pilings. I was lashing down a loose skiff when she appeared on the dock again, alone this time. She carried a light cloak over one arm and stared at the small rowing boat tied at the end. Before I could stop myself, I called out, "That wind's turning. You shouldn't take her out alone." She turned slowly, up close. Her eyes were brighter than I expected, flecked with amber. "I don't recall asking the opinion of a dock worker." The words landed like a challenge. I straightened, hammer still in my hand. "This dock is mine to maintain. And that water doesn't care how much your family paid for the villa. One strong gust and you'll be swimming whether you want to or not." Her chin lifted. "I know how to row." "You know how to row on calm rivers in the capital. This is Silvermere. Different rules." We stood there 2 feet apart while the wind snapped at the ropes and tugged at her cloak. She called me overbearing. I called her reckless. The argument flared, quick and sharp voices rising until a couple of fishermen on the next pier glanced our way. Finally, she spun on her heel and walked off, back straight, cloak billowing like a battle flag. I watched her go and told myself that was the end of it. It wasn't. Later, when the sun had dropped behind the hills and the lake turned the color of old bronze, I walked the path behind the Vera estate to check a mooring line that had come loose in the wind. Through a gap in the berry hedge, I saw her again. She sat on the grass with her shoes kicked aside, bare feet buried in the cool blades. Her shoulders were no longer straight. They curved forward as if the weight she carried had finally become too heavy. No servants, no family. Just her, the wind, and the quiet stretch of lawn rolling down to the water. She looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. She looked trapped. I stepped back before she noticed me, but the image stayed. 3 days passed. The town held its summer festival on the 3rd night. Lanterns hung from every tree along the square. Music drifted between stalls selling grilled fish and honey pastries. I wandered through the crowd, not looking for anyone in particular, when I saw her again. She stood beside her mother and older brother, smiling the exact smile expected of a merchant princess. The smile never reached her eyes. They kept drifting, restless, searching for something the music and laughter could not give her. I don't know what made me walk up to her. Maybe the memory of her bare feet in the grass. Maybe the way she had looked at the lake that first morning. Already tired of pretending, I asked quietly. She blinked, startled, then let out a short, surprised laugh that sounded real. "You have no idea." I nodded toward the simplest stall at the edge of the square. "Try something that didn't come from a silver plate." She hesitated only a moment, then followed. When she bit into the warm berry tart, and her eyes widened in honest pleasure, the first genuine smile I had seen crossed her face. For a second, the polished orc lady vanished, and something brighter took her place. After that night, our meetings stopped feeling like chance. I would be repairing oars at the dock when she appeared, claiming she needed fresh air. She would find me on the grassy hill above the lake at dusk, sitting with my back against an old pine. Once, she slipped away from her escort in the morning market and bought apples just to have an excuse to stand near the stall where I was buying nails. I showed her pieces of my world no servant had ever touched. We rode at dawn while mist still clung to the surface like breath on glass. We picked wild berries until our fingers turned purple and sticky. We sat on sun-warmed grass eating bread, still hot from the baker's oven. We climbed the old wooden bridge and jumped into the cool depths, together surfacing laughing until our lungs burned. In return, she let me see the girl no one else was allowed to know. She could recite ancient orc poetry from memory, her voice low and rhythmic like distant waves. She sketched boat hulls in the dirt with a stick, lines precise and confident, admitting she had secretly studied her family's shipbuilding ledgers at night. She hated the hollow laughter at formal dinners and feared a life spent as nothing more than a valuable piece moved across a political board. One golden evening, I rowed her far out onto the lake. The water glowed crimson beneath the sinking sun. She trailed her fingers through the surface, leaving small ripples that caught the light. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said so quietly the words almost floated away on the breeze, "Out here. I'm not a Vera. I'm not anyone's daughter or future bargaining chip. I'm just me." The sky burned above us. Her eyes reflected the dying light. I felt the first dangerous tug inside my chest, sharp and undeniable. I was falling for a girl who belonged to a world I could never enter, and the summer had only just begun. Days blurred into one another after that evening on the lake. Alara began slipping away from the villa every chance she found. She told the servants she needed quiet hours for reading, or that she wished to walk the shore alone. Instead, she came to me. I would be sanding planks in the workshop when the door creaked open and she stepped inside. Cloak hood lowered, golden eyes bright with secret excitement. She never announced herself. She simply sat on the low stool I kept for her, now watching my hands move over the wood. Once, while I was focused on a difficult curve, she reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face. Her fingers lingered. Neither of us spoke. The air between us felt charged, heavier than the summer heat pressing against the walls. Another afternoon, she arrived with ink stains on her fingertips, from sketching hull designs she had stolen from her father's ledgers. She spread the papers across my workbench and explained the lines with quiet confidence. I listened, then handed her a small hammer and showed her how to drive a nail straight. Her first attempts were clumsy. She laughed at herself, a low sound that made something tight in my chest loosen. When she finally landed a clean strike, she looked up at me with such triumph that I forgot the rest of the world existed. Evenings grew bolder. She would fall asleep on the bench outside the workshop after we talked too long, head tilted against the rough wall, breathing slow and even. I sat across from her for hours, afraid to move, afraid the smallest sound would wake her and end the moment. The first time it happened, I covered her with my own worn jacket. When she stirred at dawn, she pulled the fabric closer, inhaled once and smiled without opening her eyes. We argued too. Small sparks that flared and died just as quickly. She hated when I warned her about being seen. I hated when she spoke of her family's expectations as if they were inevitable. Yet every disagreement ended the same way. One of us would reach out a hand on a wrist, a shoulder brushing another, and the anger would dissolve into something warmer. One gray afternoon, the sky opened without warning. Rain hammered the roof of the workshop while we stood inside, shoulders touching, listening to the downpour. She turned to me, hair damp from the short dash across the yard, and asked the question that had been circling us both. "Where is this going, Rowan?" I took her hand and led her through the rain to the small plot of land I had bought over 3 hard years of saving. Nothing stood there yet except tall grass and a few marker stakes. The lake stretched out below us, silver under the clouds. I stopped at the highest point and faced her. "This is where the house will stand," I said. "Wide porch facing the water. Windows that catch the last light of every day. I'm building it for someone brave enough to stay." Her gaze moved across the empty ground, then back to me. For who? I did not look away. For the woman who chooses this life even when she could have any other. Rain slid down her cheeks like tears she refused to shed. She stepped closer until our bodies nearly touched. The storm roared around us, but the only sound I heard was the quick beat of my own heart. That night, after the rain eased to a soft whisper, we walked the grassy slope behind the workshop. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. She stopped beneath the old oak and looked up at the scattered stars breaking through the clouds. I reached for her. My fingers found the loose strands of hair at her temple and tucked them back with a gentleness I did not know I possessed. She rose onto her toes, our mouths met slowly, almost carefully, as if both of us understood the line we were crossing. The kiss deepened. Her hands slid up my chest, gripping the front of my shirt. I pulled her closer, tasting rain and salt, and something that belonged only to her. When we finally broke apart, we were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. No grand declarations, just the quiet certainty that whatever came next, we had already chosen each other. The days that followed carried a sharper edge. Her mother, Lady Isolde, began watching her more closely. Servants whispered. Her older brother was heard asking questions in the market about the young boat builder who spent so much time near the eastern villa. I felt the pressure building like a storm on the horizon, but I pushed it aside every time Alara appeared at my door. We fought our first real battle on a humid evening when the lake lay flat and breathless. She arrived later than usual. Cloak clutched tight, eyes stormy. My mother asked where I go every day, she said. I lied again, but the lies are getting harder. I set down the chisel I had been using. Then stop lying. Or stop coming. The words came out harsher than I intended. Her face tightened. You think this is easy for me? You think I can simply walk away from everything I was raised to be? I think you deserve more than a summer game, I answered, voice low. And I won't be the reason you lose your entire world. She stepped back as if I had struck her. So you decide for both of us. You decide what I can and cannot have. She turned and left without another word. The workshop felt emptier than it ever had. I worked through the night, unable to sleep. Just before dawn, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. I opened the door. Alara stood there in the pale light cloak, soaked with dew, eyes red. I walked the entire shore thinking of every reason I should stay away, she said. Then I realized none of them mattered if I couldn't breathe without you. I pulled her inside. We did not speak again for a long time. That night we crossed every remaining line between us. Her hands explored my shoulders, my back, the scars left by years of labor. Mine traced the strong lines of her arms, the curve of her neck, the places where her gray-green skin warmed under my touch. We moved together with the same fierce honesty we had shown since the first argument on the dock. When morning came, she lay curled against me, one hand resting over my heart, and I knew I would never be the same. Later that week, I took her back to the empty plot. The grass had been trampled by our previous visit. I knelt, picked up a small stone and placed it where the corner post would one day stand. I'm not waiting for some distant future, I told her. I'm starting the house now. Board by board, nail by nail, and when it's finished, I want you to walk through the door and know it was built for you. She looked at the stone, then at me. Tears gathered in her eyes but did not fall. Instead, she wrapped her arms around me and held on as though the summer itself might try to tear us apart. I held her just as tightly. The house had not yet risen from the ground, but something far more important already had. For the first time in my life, I understood that love was not a gentle thing. It was a hammer and a nail, a storm, and a shelter, a choice made again and again in the face of everything that said it could not last, and I had chosen her. The days that followed our night in the workshop carried a dangerous kind of peace. Alara left before sunrise each morning, slipping back to the villa while the mist still clung to the lake. She would return in the late afternoon with fresh bruises of secrecy under her eyes, and a smile that belonged only to me. I worked harder than ever, my hands moving faster over the wood because every plank I shaped felt like another hour I could steal with her. We spoke less about the future and more about the present. She traced the calluses on my palms and told me stories of the capital's marble halls where every conversation hid a bargain. I showed her how to plane a board until it sang under the blade and admitted that the only bargain I had ever wanted was one that let me keep her. Then, the cracks appeared. Lady Isolde had always watched her daughter with the sharp eyes of a merchant who never lost a deal. One morning, a servant followed Alara at a distance. By evening, the entire villa knew where she spent her afternoons. That night, the dinner table became a battlefield. I heard the story later from Alara herself, voice shaking as she recounted it in the dim light of my workshop. She had stood at the long oak's table and declared it plainly she loved me, not as a summer distraction, not as rebellion, but as the only truth she refused to bargain away. Lady Isolde had set her wineglass down with deliberate calm. Her reply cut deeper than any shout. Loving a human dockhand is not courage, daughter. It is the fastest way to ruin everything your blood has built. The words reached me the next morning when a messenger in Vera livery arrived at the dock. He handed me a sealed note without meeting my eyes. I was summoned to the villa at noon. I went. The white stone walls felt colder than the lake in winter. Servants moved silently through the halls. Lady Isolde waited in a sunlit parlor, overlooking the water, seated in a high-backed chair like a queen on her throne. A single teacup steamed on the table between us. She did not offer me one. "Mr. Hale," she began, voice smooth as polished steel. "You have ambition, I respect that. But ambition has limits." She slid an envelope across the table. Inside was more money than I had earned in 5 years of hard labor. "This is not payment for silence," she said. "It is an opportunity. Take it, build your little house. Find a woman from your own world who will never ask you to be more than you are. And let my daughter return to the life she was born for." I left the envelope untouched. "I don't want your coin," I told her. "I want the right to choose who stands beside me. And I believe Alara wants the same." Lady Isolde's smile never wavered. "You may give her 1 season of freedom. I will give her an entire lifetime of security. The difference, Mr. Hale, is that I understand the cost of both." I walked out of the villa with my fists clenched so tightly my nails left marks in my palms. That same week the trade winds shifted in ways no one had predicted. New tariffs swept down from the capital, targeting human lumber yards and boatworks along the lake. Reports spoke of blocked shipping lanes and burned warehouses. Newspapers called it a dispute between merchant houses. Everyone in Silvermere knew it was becoming something uglier, a line drawn between orc and human. The Vera clan used the chaos as their excuse. 2 days later, Alara arrived at the workshop before dawn. Cloakhood pulled low, face pale. She had been given 1 hour to pack. The family was returning to the capital immediately. Trade routes were closing. Her safety, her future, her duty, all of it demanded she leave at once. We had no time for long goodbyes. I ran with her to the private landing where the Vera boats waited. The sky was still gray, the water flat and cold. She gripped my hand so hard I felt the bones shift. "I will write," she whispered. "Every day if I must. Wait for me." I kissed her once, fiercely, tasting salt from the tears she refused to let fall. Then her mother's voice called from the deck, and the moment shattered. Alara was pulled aboard. The ropes were cast off. The boats glided into the mist before the sun had fully risen. I stood on the empty dock until the last sail disappeared. The letters began that night. I wrote the first by lantern light, ink smudged by my rough fingers. I told her the lake had turned the color of old pewter. I told her the workshop felt too large without her laughter echoing off the beams. I told her I had driven the first corner post into the ground where our house would stand. Each word was a promise. I was still here. I still chose her. I sent one every week for an entire year. None of them reached her. Lady Isolde had arranged for every letter to be intercepted before it left the local post. Alara waited in the capital for replies that never came. She told me years later how hope curdled first into doubt, then into anger, and finally into a numb acceptance that I had taken my pleasure and moved on. The trade war dragged on for 3 long years. Roads between Silvermere and the capital grew dangerous. Merchants on both sides lost fortunes. I kept working, kept building. The house rose slowly, board by board, nail by nail, through summers that burned and winters that froze the lake solid. Every joist I set carried her name in my mind. Every window frame I measured was cut to catch the exact angle of light she had loved on our last evening together. I became quieter, harder. The dream that had once felt bright now felt like a duty I owed to the memory of us. By the 5th year the house stood complete. Wide porch facing the water, tall windows that drank the sunset, a small garden of berry bushes in the back. An upstairs room with a sloped roof where someone could read on rainy days. It was more beautiful than I had dared imagine, and it felt emptier than the workshop had on the morning she left. I still lived in the old rooms above the dock, unable to move into the finished house. It waited for her, not for me. One gray afternoon in late autumn, I bought a newspaper from the market stall. The headline on the society page stopped my breath. "Vera heiress to wed Lord Garrick Vere in grand capital ceremony." A photograph showed Alara standing beside a tall orc lord in formal robes. She wore a gown of deep crimson. Her expression was perfect, composed, unreadable. But I knew her eyes. They held the same distant hunger I had seen the first morning she looked across the lake. I folded the paper once, twice, until the image disappeared. That night, I drank for the first time in years. The whiskey burned, but it could not reach the colder ache beneath. 7 summers had passed since the day she stepped onto my dock. The house stood ready. The letters I had written still lay sealed in a wooden box beneath my bed, and the girl I had fallen for now belonged to another world, another man, another future I had no place in. Yet, every evening I still walked to the end of the dock and stared across the water toward the empty white villa. Some part of me refused to believe the story was finished, even if the rest of the world already had. 7 years had carved new lines into my face and heavier calluses into my palms, but the lake remained unchanged. Silvermere still stretched wide and silver under the same summer sky, indifferent to the years that had passed. I had finished the house long ago. It stood on the rise above the water, exactly as I had promised. Broad porch facing the horizon, tall windows that caught the dying light, berry bushes heavy with fruit in the back garden. Yet, I still slept in the cramped rooms above the workshop, unable to move into the empty rooms I had built for someone who never came. I told myself I had moved on. The letters stayed sealed in their wooden box beneath my bed. The newspaper clipping of her engagement had yellowed in a drawer. Life narrowed to the steady rhythm of hammer and saw the quiet satisfaction of boats launched and sails filled with wind. I spoke less. I smiled less. The town had grown used to the silent boat builder who lived alone with his perfect, unused house. Then, one morning in early June, the market buzzed with fresh gossip. The Vera villa was being sold. Lady Isolde had sent her daughter to handle the final arrangements. Ilara Voss had returned to Silvermere. I heard the news while buying nails and felt the ground tilt beneath my boots. I kept walking. I kept working. But that afternoon I found myself at the lakeside market without any real reason, eyes scanning the crowded stalls. She appeared between the fishmongers and the bread sellers. Time had sharpened her the way salt sharpens steel. She was 30 now. Taller in presence than memory had allowed, her gray-green skin carrying the same warm bronze undertone under the sun. Her hair was pinned in a simpler style, a few strands loose against her neck. She wore a traveling coat of deep charcoal, practical yet unmistakably expensive. A thin gold band circled the third finger of her left hand. Our eyes met across 20 feet of market noise and 7 years of silence. Neither of us moved at first. The world narrowed to the space between us. I saw the exact moment recognition hit her shoulders, tightening lips parting slightly, golden eyes widening before she forced them steady again. I walked forward. Because standing still felt worse. Ilara, I said. My voice came out rough, unused. Rowan. She spoke my name like a question and an answer at once. We stood there while people pushed past us carrying baskets and children. Polite words came first, the kind strangers use. She asked about the workshop. I asked about the capital. She mentioned the villa sale. I mentioned the unusually warm spring. Every sentence felt like stepping on thin ice. She did not mention the house. I did not mention the ring on her finger. That night, I could not sleep. The workshop walls pressed too close. I walked the shore until dawn, boots leaving dark prints in the wet sand, wondering if she lay awake in the white villa, wondering the same thing. 3 days passed before she found me again. I was repairing a mooring cleat at the end of the public dock when her shadow fell across the planks. She carried no escort this time. No cloak to hide behind. Just herself and the same restless energy I remembered from our first summer. I need to see it, she said without greeting. The house. The one they wrote about in the papers. I set the chisel down slowly. It's not for tourists. I'm not here as a tourist. We walked the familiar path in silence. The trail had grown narrower with disused grass brushing our legs. When the house came into view, she stopped. I watched her face as her gaze moved across the wide porch. The tall windows, the small garden where berry bushes now grew thick and wild. She stepped onto the porch boards I had planed by hand. Her fingers brushed the railing I had sanded until it felt like silk. She opened the front door without asking. Inside, the air smelled of fresh cedar and dust. Sunlight poured through the western windows and painted long golden rectangles across the floor. She moved through every room like someone reading a letter written in a language she had almost forgotten. In the upstairs reading nook, she paused, longest fingers tracing the sloped ceiling where rain would drum softly on stormy days. When she turned back to me, her eyes shone too bright. "You built this," she whispered. "Exactly as you said you would." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed to keep my hands from reaching for her. It was the only promise I could still keep. She looked away toward the lake, visible through every window. "I thought you had forgotten. When the letters stopped, I convinced myself the whole summer had been a game to you." The words landed like a blow I had waited 7 years to receive. "I wrote to you. Every week for a year, I told you about the first post going into the ground. I told you about the windows I measured to catch the exact light you loved. None of them reached you. Her head snapped back. I waited. I checked the post every single day until waiting felt like bleeding. Then I stopped. I told myself you had chosen the easier path. We stood in the sunlit room while the truth settled between us like dust after a long storm. Lady Isolde had intercepted every letter. The silence had not been ours. It had been manufactured, deliberate, and cruel. Ilara's shoulders began to shake. She pressed a hand to her mouth. I crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her against me before either of us could think better of it. She buried her face in my shirt, the way she once had during summer rain. Her body fit against mine, as if the 7 years apart had changed nothing and everything at once. We talked until the light shifted from gold to amber. She told me about the capital, about the endless dinners where every laugh hid a contract, about Lord Garrick Vare, who was kind and steady and everything her family required. She spoke of him without anger, only exhaustion. He did not make her feel trapped. He simply made her feel nothing at all. I showed her the wooden box beneath my bed. She read the letters one by one, while I sat on the porch steps and watched the lake turn the color of old bronze. When she finally came outside, her eyes were red but dry. "Why didn't you come find me?" she asked. I had no money for the journey, and no name that could open doors in the capital. By the time the trade routes reopened, your engagement had already been announced. I told myself I had no right to ruin what you had chosen. She sat beside me on the steps. Our shoulders brushed. I never chose him. I chose silence because silence was the only thing left. The days that followed blurred into stolen hours. She came to the workshop in the mornings under the excuse of finalizing villa paperwork. We rode the lake again at dawn, the oars moving in the same rhythm we had learned together. We picked berries from the garden behind the house and ate them warm from the bush juice staining our fingers purple. At night, she lingered on the porch until the stars came out, and sometimes longer. But the ring remained on her finger. One afternoon her mother arrived at the workshop unannounced. Lady Isolde had aged into something sharper and colder. She looked at the half-finished skiff on the blocks, then at her daughter standing too close to me. "The contracts are nearly complete," she told Ilara. "Lord Garrick expects you back within the week. The wedding date is set." Ilara's voice stayed calm. "I need more time to settle the villa sale." Her mother's smile was thin. "The villa is not the reason you returned, daughter. We both know that." She turned her gaze to me. "Mr. Hale. Still building boats, still dreaming small." I did not rise to the bait. "Some dreams don't need to be large. They only need to be honest." Lady Isolde left without another word, but the air in the workshop felt heavier after she was gone. That evening, Ilara and I sat on the porch of the house as the sun sank. She turned the gold band on her finger slowly, as if testing its weight. "He is a good man," she said quietly. "He will never raise his voice. He will never ask me to be less than the Vera name requires. I could live comfortably beside him for the rest of my life." I kept my eyes on the lake. "And would you be living or simply breathing?" She did not answer right away. When she did, her voice cracked. "I don't know how to choose myself after so many years of being chosen for." I reached over and covered her hand with mine, stilling the nervous turning of the ring. "If you stay, don't stay because you pity the man who built this house. Don't stay because you regret the letters that never arrived. Stay only if you choose this life, even when the easier one is still waiting." She looked at me, then golden eyes searching my face like she had on that first evening on the water. The sun had almost disappeared. The porch boards held the last warmth of the day. I waited for her answer without begging, without promises, because I had already given her everything I had 7 years ago. The decision would be hers alone. And for the first time since she had stepped off that carriage, I allowed myself to hope that this time, she might choose the shore instead of the ship that always sailed away. The carriage wheels faded into the distance before the dust had even settled on the road. I stood at the edge of the dock long after the last trace of her was gone, hands loose at my sides, the lake stretching flat and indifferent under a pale sky. Ilara had left at first light, summoned back to the capital to finalize the wedding arrangements. The date had been set, the contracts were nearly sealed. She had kissed me once on the porch of the house I built for her, a kiss that tasted of salt and goodbye, then climbed into the carriage without looking back. I told myself I would not wait. I told myself the summer had already given me more than I deserved. I was wrong. The days dragged into weeks. I threw myself into work with a fury I had not felt in years, planing hulls until my shoulders burned, caulking seams until my fingers cracked and bled. At night, I sat on the porch of the empty house and stared across the water toward the white villa that now stood dark and shuttered. The berry bushes grew heavy with fruit no one picked. The tall windows caught the sunset and held it like a memory I could not release. I did not write her again. There was nothing left to say that 7 years of unsent letters had not already said. Then, on a night when the sky split open without warning, she came back. Rain hammered the roof of the workshop like thrown stones. I was closing the last shutter when I heard the carriage wheels grind over wet gravel. I stepped outside into the downpour. The vehicle lurched to a stop just beyond the dock lantern light, swinging wildly. The door opened. Alara stepped down. Her traveling cloak was soaked through, clinging to her frame. Water streamed from her hair and ran down the gray-green planes of her face. In both arms she clutched a wooden box I recognized. Instantly the box I had kept beneath my bed for 7 years, filled with every letter I had written, and she had never received. Her golden eyes found mine through the curtain of rain. I crossed the distance in 3 strides and pulled her against me. She came willingly, the box pressed between our chests like a shield and a bridge at once. The rain beat down on us, but neither of us moved. I didn't come because I regret anything, she said against my neck, voice raw. I came because I choose. This time I choose. I held her tighter, feeling the tremor in her shoulders that had nothing to do with the cold. We stood there until the worst of the storm passed. Then I led her inside the workshop, wrapped her in the thickest blanket I owned, and lit the small iron stove. She sat on the low stool that had always been hers and opened the box. One by one she read the letters aloud in the flickering light. Her voice cracked on the early ones where I still believed she would answer. It steadied on the later ones where my words had grown shorter, heavier, like a man carving his own tombstone. When she reached the final page, she closed her eyes for a long moment. I read them all in one night, she whispered. In the capital. After the final fitting for the wedding gown, she told me everything then. She had returned to find the villa preparations in full swing. Dressmakers pinned silk around her, while merchants discussed dowries and shipping routes. Lord Garrick had greeted her with the same steady kindness she had described before, gentle hands, quiet voice, eyes that never asked for more than she could give. But something inside her had already broken open. She had gone to her mother's private study that same night and demanded the truth. Lady Isolde had not denied it. She had simply lifted her chin and said, "I protected you from a mistake that would have cost you everything." Alara had answered without raising her voice. "You didn't protect me. You chose for me. And I am finished letting other people choose." The next morning she had met Lord Garrick in the garden of the family estate. She returned the gold band with steady hands. She told him she was sorry, that he deserved someone who could love him without reservation, and that she could not be that person. He had listened without anger, only a quiet sorrow that made the moment harder. Then he had wished her well and walked away. She had packed a single bag, taken the box of letters her mother had hidden for 7 years, and left before the invitations could be recalled. Now she sat in my workshop, a rain still dripping from her cloak onto the floorboards, and looked at me like I was the only solid thing left in her world. "I gave up the name, the contracts, the future they planned," she said. "I gave up everything except the one thing I cannot live without, you." I knelt in front of her and took her hands. They were cold, but her grip was strong. "The road ahead won't be easy," I told her. "Your family will fight this. The trade houses will call it scandal. Some in town will never accept an orc woman living openly with a human boat builder. There will be days when the world feels too heavy for both of us." She leaned forward until our foreheads touched. "Then we carry it together, the way we should have from the beginning." We moved into the house that night. For the first time the rooms felt alive. She walked through every space again, but this time she touched the walls like they belonged to her. We slept in the wide bed beneath the sloped roof of the reading nook, rain drumming softly overhead, her head on my chest and my arm around her waist. I listened to her breathing until it evened into sleep, and for the first time in 7 years, I did not feel the house waiting for someone who would never arrive. The weeks that followed tested every word we had spoken. Letters arrived from the capital, cold formal demands from Lady Isolde, warnings of severed trade ties, even a discreet offer of money if Alara would return and correct her mistake. We burned them together in the fireplace. Merchants in town muttered when they saw us walking the market side by side. Once, a group of dock workers refused to unload a shipment until I personally guaranteed there would be no trouble from her kind. I stared them down until they looked away. Through it all, Alara never wavered. She worked beside me in the workshop, learning to sand planks and mix caulk. She planted herbs in the garden behind the house and cooked simple meals that tasted better than anything served in marble halls. At night, she read orc poetry aloud, while I carved new oars, her voice weaving through the lamplight like a second heartbeat. One afternoon in late summer, the sky cleared to a perfect blue. I was down by the water repairing the hull of a small skiff, sleeves rolled high, the sun warm on my back. Ilara sat on the wide porch with one of my old letters open on her lap. She had taken to reading them again, not because she doubted, but because each word reminded her of the road we had traveled to reach this moment. I looked up from the hull and saw her there, gray-green skin glowing in the golden light, dark hair loose over one shoulder, bare feet resting on the warm boards. The lake lay calm behind her, reflecting the house and the woman who finally lived inside it. A light wind moved through the berry bushes, carrying the sweet scent of ripe fruit. She caught me watching and smiled the same smile I had first seen at the summer festival 7 years ago, only deeper now, quieter, earned. I set down my tools and walked up the gentle slope. When I reached the porch steps, I stopped and simply looked at her. No words were necessary. The house stood solid behind us. The lake stretched wide and forgiving. The years of silence, of intercepted letters, of choices made by other hands, all of it had led here. She folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Then she rose, stepped down to meet me, and slid her arms around my waist. I rested my chin on top of her head and breathed in the scent of sun-warmed skin and fresh wood. The world would keep turning. Families would keep disapproving. Trade routes would keep shifting between orc and human. Some mornings would still feel heavy with the weight of what we had defied. But this porch belonged to us. This house belonged to us. And the woman in my arms had chosen me when every easier path still lay open. I tightened my hold and closed my eyes against the brightness of the lake. The summer that had begun with a hammer strike and an argument on the dock had finally, after 7 long years, brought her home. And this time she was staying.